Hello, and welcome again to our next plenary. For our next plenary, I could talk about her credentials, where she has worked, what she has written, her receiving an OBE for her work as an English language teacher, but I'd like to be a little bit more personal with this one. So when I became a teacher years ago, inexperienced, not really knowing what I was doing in a classroom, Roger House and Anna Parisi, my bosses back then, started by giving me one book. That book was Discussions That Work. And Roger, I remember he just gave it to me and said, learn it, adapt it, use it. And not much later, Anna Parisi came in, saw me, observed me in a classroom, and she said, oh, no. And she gave me another book, and that was 5-minute activities. And of course, Pennier, right? And then I looked on the bookshelves in our scholio, in our frontisterio, and I found grammar practice activities by Pennier. And then I used that like no other book I've ever used in my life before. And then I found another book, and then another book, and another book, and all by Pennier. And until then, I still have these books in my bag. I've taken them with me, I've adapted them, I've used them a lot. And the new ones, even the new teachers, even though you might not know exactly who she is, everything you do in the classroom is based a lot on what she has written. So, ladies and gentlemen, my honor, Pennier.
Wow, thank you very much, Natasha. So I have written a lot of books, but my main claim to fame, as it were, is not the books. It's the fact that I was for 30 years a classroom teacher in elementary and high school in Israel. And most of what I've written, and perhaps the reason why what I've been written speaks to teachers, is on the basis of that experience. So a lot of teaching, some teacher training, writing in my spare time after school, attending conferences like this one when I can, which I really enjoy, meeting teachers from all over the world, and finding that how much we seem to have in common, that the kinds of problems and concerns that occupy me also occupy teachers in other parts of the world. Apart from the topics which Natasha mentioned, more recently I've been becoming very interested in the topic of materials, course books, textbooks, and how they're written, how they're used, principles underlining their design, and how they are changing. And the fashion is to say today, oh yes, everything's changing and we need to educate our students for a period of change and innovation. But in fact, what is interesting with this particular topic is how many things are actually staying the same. Although they look superficially as if perhaps they are changing, they are not, or not as much as we thought they would be. So I worked up this presentation looking at some aspects of teaching materials which, in my opinion, are changing or not changing. So innovations, if there are innovations, are they here to stay? Things that have changed in the last 10, 20 years, are they going to stay? Or traditional components, will they change or are they going to stay? And I'm going to look at the research literature, but also quite a lot of my own personal interpretation. I hope I'll make the distinction clear when I get there, but I've used both sources. And I'm going to take a selection of specific topics within materials, look at each one, and then say what I think the bottom line is, whether it's going to change or stay the same. And I hope we'll have time for you to express your own opinions also on the topic. So the topics are, first of all, the use of course books at all, whether one should use course books, and if so, how much. Digital materials as a component or as an alternative to paper. Methodology, in particular the communicative approach. Culture, intercultural aspects of materials, the teaching of vocabulary materials, the use of the mother tongue in materials, and we'll start off. Okay, so first of all, the use of textbooks. So when I first started teaching, this was in the late 1960s, would you believe, before many of you were born. When I first started teaching, there was a fashion going very much against course books. People were telling us, oh, you shouldn't be using course books, it's opting out, you should take full responsibility for your own teaching. And a bit later, Dick Allwright published an article in the ELT Journal saying you shouldn't use course books, you should find alternatives. Later, Thornbury came up with his dogme idea, which included not using textbooks or using them as little as possible, on the grounds that theoretically they de-skill or disempower teachers. If you're using a textbook, you, as it were, hand over the authority to the textbook, and you don't take the trouble to initiate and teach yourself. They discourage creativity because it's all been created for you. Any one textbook may be inappropriate for a particular learner community, and there is something in that. There is obviously a textbook cannot cover all the possible communities that could be taught. They might be inappropriate for learners' culture or level or interests or age, and their needs and learning style. So many writers, particularly of that period, sort of early 1970s, 1980s, were suggesting that teachers should abandon course books, either. Come a few options here. Abandon course books and just access selected materials as you need them. Particularly more recently, people have been saying, oh, there's such a lot on the internet, you should be able to take whatever you need from the internet. You don't need the ready-made course books. Or use the course books, but adapt them very extensively, or use the course book occasionally, while using other materials quite a lot. But, and here I'm going to come up with my own position on this, we don't have time. I don't know how many of you have tried and how often you have tried to find a particular kind of text on the internet you want for your students. It's hours and hours of surfing until you find just what you want. And I see all sorts of nodding heads here, people who've been through this experience like I have. And with a busy teaching schedule, you just don't have the time for that. How many hours do you normally teach? And those of you who are in full teaching employment, or 1.5, some of you, or two things, how many hours a week? 32. Yeah. Okay. Any advance on 32? Wow, 40. But even if you're teaching 20, 25, it's a lot. You don't have the luxury of being able to sit down for hours and look for exactly what you need. We don't have time. Most teachers, including myself, throughout my teaching career, use course books as the basis for their teaching, as not the only thing I use, but certainly as a basis for the course, for various reasons. Firstly, it gives you ready-made texts and tasks. They may not be quite what you want, but they're there and you can adapt them. And this is what I'm going to talk about incidentally in my workshop tomorrow. Given certain texts and tasks, how can we easily tweak them, adapt them to different classes? But I'll set that aside till tomorrow. They give you a framework, they give you a structure, you know where you're going with them. You're, say, 2/3 or through the textbook, you know how much you've done and how much you still have to do. It's a feeling of confidence and structure that students, both students and teachers, really need. Structure, feeling of systematic progress. They are cost effective. If you had to produce the kind of material you get in a standard course book on your own through photocopying and designing and everything, you couldn't do it. It's just very, very expensive. So for the package they give you, course books are pretty cost effective. They mediate the curriculum. If you have an exam book which mediates the curriculum of an exam, if you have a state curriculum, some ministries of education lay out a particular curriculum of grammar, vocabulary, can-dos, whatever. The course book will mediate that curriculum. Another interesting thing about the textbook is that it has prestige. I remember once teaching a very low-level group, ability group in a school, and I thought I didn't have a textbook which was exactly right for them, and I thought I'll make up my own materials and we'll work on the materials which I create. And they were insulted. They said, we want to feel like everybody else. We need if all the other classes have textbooks, we want a textbook as well. And I learned from that there is some kind of prestige attached to the textbook, whether it's digital or paper, it doesn't matter. But the fact that a class has a textbook to follow is in some way prestigious. Gives a lot of teacher support, teacher guidance, particularly in the early years of teaching. Very, very helpful. And it contributes to student autonomy. This is something which people don't think about very much. But if a student doesn't have a textbook and is dependent on the teacher to bring all the teaching materials, him or herself, then the student is not autonomous. They can't go to the textbook and do their own thing. They're totally dependent on the teacher. If we don't want them to be teacher dependent, we need to give them materials of their own, which they can own and use and learn from. Teachers and textbooks are sort of symbiotic relationships. Teachers need course books need teachers. I think, anyway, teachers need course books. This is my own opinion. I think I can't manage without a course book. I can adapt it lots of ways, as I'll be saying tomorrow, but I need it as a basis, and the course books cannot survive unless they are mediated by the teachers. There are two main reasons, I think, which when we are adapting textbooks that we use, that we have. One is the popular one, there's something wrong with the textbook. There's something lacking, and therefore I need to make it up. This is a sort of anti-textbook approach. Textbook is always not, so we need to improve it. But I would suggest that there is another approach, which is, yes, the textbook is fine. It's fine as a basis, but I want to make it even better. I want to use it to fulfill its potential. The textbook is a basis, it's a potential, but in order to exploit that potential, I need to use it sensibly, creatively, in different ways, to make it more fun or interesting, make it available to different learners, make it more personal, and so on and so on. So the question is not if to use a textbook, but how to use a textbook or course book. Teachers need to be aware of what needs to be adapted and will benefit from ideas about how to adapt. I think it's a pity, as Tomlinson pointed out recently, it's a pity that there aren't more courses in teacher training courses, like CELTA, Delta and all the rest of them. There aren't actually dedicated courses using the materials, or writing materials, or designing materials, but there are very few courses in standard teacher training programs that actually focus on good use of materials and what good materials are, in fact, and all the aspects of them. So teachers need ideas, course in teacher education programs, in-service courses, teacher handbooks. I'm not aware there is on the market a handbook saying how to adapt your textbook. I may be wrong. There should be. Maybe that's the next thing I have to write. Bottom line, okay? Course books are needed and, in my opinion, are here to stay. They are a positive aid to teaching, but we need guidance and help in how to adapt them, and you need to be aware that we do need to adapt them. Okay, my second topic is digital materials. And big question, will digital materials replace paper? I mean, about 10 years ago, everyone was saying, yes, yes, of course. Digital materials will replace paper. It hasn't happened. And in my opinion, it's not going to happen either. Let's look at some of the issues here. E-books in general, replacing paper books in Kindles and so on. E-books as textbooks, as learning books, okay, in various kinds of courses. Other digital materials, like the ones that are listed up there, exercises, texts, and so on, and technology to back up the materials, such as the opportunity for online teacher-student communication through learning management systems like Moodle or through email. And let's go on to the particular topics. E-books in general, an interesting thing happened here in the last 2 or 3 years. On the increase worldwide, e-books are, there is a rise in e-books. But what's happening in the USA, which was the first place where e-books really took off, is there's been a sort of leveling off over the last couple of years. I won't read this out. Can you read that? No? I'll just read the first part. It says, overall, the spectacular growth in ebooks since the fourth quarter of 2010 seems to have come to a halt by 2012, so we're 4 years behind, arguably the result of saturation in the migration of readers from print to digital. In other words, all the people who were going to migrate from print to digital have done so, and it's leveled off, and we're not having any more. And there is some evidence this is beginning to happen in the UK and elsewhere. Popularity of different kinds of ebooks is quite interesting. Fiction is very popular as an ebook. I read virtually all my fiction on my Kindle these days, and those of you who have Kindles probably the same. Leisure reading. But print books, according to the research, are preferred, first of all, in children's picture books. Children still prefer paper, and parents prefer picture books and paper rather than reading off an iPad or something. And college textbooks, and here we're coming nearer home. There's been quite a lot of research done on student preferences in the States, young adults in this case, we're not talking about children, young adults in college who are asked, if you have a textbook for your course, whether it's English or engineering or geography or whatever, do you prefer to have an e-book or do you prefer to have it in print? And there are a few studies which say we prefer digital, but the overwhelming majority of studies say we prefer print. And this seems to be an overall trend, an overall tendency. Why? And when the students who said we prefer print for our textbooks, when they were asked why, they said various reasons. First of all, they said that being online is distracting. I don't know how many of you have run classes with kids using iPads. This is so true. They start getting distracted to all sorts of other things, and iPhones or smartphones even more so. Endurance, they find it less tiring. I don't know quite what they mean here. Educational presentation, interacting with an on-screen presentation that is cumbersome compared to paper. And I've come across this with quite a lot of my colleagues who say when they need to read an academic article, quite a lot of them find it difficult to read on screen. They say, I print it out and then I read it off paper. Some of you are nodding here. It depends on your learning style, I suppose. I find it quite easy and comfortable to read off screen, but a lot of my friends don't, and they actually need to read off paper. Durability, a paper book does not depend on electricity or Wi-Fi or anything else, and it's constantly available wherever you are. So it's just a question of convenience and durability. And it says in the last sentence, an electronic textbook may expire when the course ends, but a paper textbook may be kept for reference. Okay, be the reasons what they may be. This appears to be a fairly solid research finding, that people prefer paper textbooks for courses of study. Other types of potentially useful digital materials which we can use in our classrooms, authentic text downloaded, which I'm sure you've used, online dictionaries. I mean, very few of us look up on paper anymore. If I have a word I don't know in a language, I check it on the internet. Self-check exercises, use of various apps or email for interactive writing or for student-teacher interaction. A lot of my colleagues in Israel have a class WhatsApp. So they have all the kids in their class registered on a WhatsApp, and they maintain the communication with them like that. YouTube, podcasts, and so on. The problem with all the things I've just listed, the various enrichment kinds of materials, the problem which I've come across in some contexts, though I'm beginning to see that in Greece it isn't so true, but in Israel it still is. In Israel there's a sort of assumption. It's digital, so it must be good. We actually have a mandate from the Ministry of Education in Israel saying every teacher should be using the digital materials at least twice a week. I mean, what sort of a law is that? What sort of a thing to say is that? What you want to say to your teachers is you should be doing things that help your students learn. If the digital materials help them learn, great. And if they don't, not. But to tell them just to use digital materials for the sake of the digital materials seems to me wrong and even unethical. ICT is a goal in itself. So things which are good, which the digital materials can really, really help us. Online dictionaries and grammars, obviously. YouTube for listening practice. YouTube not more than podcasts, because it's really important to see the speaker rather than just hear. Negative ones, learning to write. You really need to learn to write with a pen and paper, at the early stages anyway. Learning to talk, you really need to learn to talk with a real live interlocutor. And online grammar exercises, I don't like them very much because they give you one right answer. And sometimes when another answer is possible, they won't give you that, and the students say, why is this wrong? And in fact, it isn't wrong. And they also can't give you the sensitive feedback that a teacher can give, so I'm not sure about online grammar exercises. So my position, which I think most of you, from what I've heard, and I've been to a couple of lovely sessions today on using online materials, ICT can supply valuable tools, but so can conventional materials. There's still a lot that the paper can do and that immediate face-to-face interaction can do that the computer can't do. And our job as teachers is to identify where digital materials promote good learning and where conventional tools do so better. I think that's really the crucial point here. And to employ them selectively or indeed in conjunction in blended learning. So bottom line, my bottom line here, which from what I've heard I think most of you would agree with, the question is not which is better. The question is which is better for what purpose and when, and that's up to us to decide. Methodology. When did the communicative approach come in? Late 1970s, early 1990s. Widdowson's The Teaching Languages Communication. Luke, I think that's where you and I met when we went to a talk by Widdowson on this. And Widdowson has said about that book, Teaching Languages Communication, that if he were to write it today, he would not call it Teaching Language as Communication. He would call it Teaching Language for Communication, because teaching language as communication is not necessarily the best way to get students to learn to communicate. Think about it. I'll come back to that in a moment. But still, communication, the communicative approach is the approach which is overwhelmingly promoted in the literature, in conferences, in webinars, all over. That language is communication, so teaching should be based on communicative work in all the skills. And you get promotion of a method called task-based instruction, which is all communicative tasks. which involves things like lots of listening comprehension, lots of discussion and talking, reading for pleasure, extensive reading, reading for information, writing for a communicative purpose. And modern language curriculums are, on the whole, not lists of grammatical structures and lists of words as they used to be, but rather lists of can-dos, as in the Common European Framework for Languages. For example, a simple one here on the screen: can communicate in simple and routine tasks. Okay? Not can form the simple interrogative, or can use the third conditional, but this sort of thing. So the communicative approach is sort of the accepted way of organizing materials and organizing curricula, but it's not actually happening. Materials should use, in theory, a lot of communicative tasks, one that encourage students to create and receive messages, make them focus on meanings, put less emphasis on correctness. But in fact, what are we seeing in textbooks? In the majority of tasks in popular course books, the focus is not on conveying meanings, but on getting it right. And students are assessed on how far they've managed to get them right or not. And the most popular, best-selling books in the ALT market are things like Grammar in Use by Raymond Murphy and things like that, which are really directed very clearly towards getting it right, through getting the grammar right, getting the vocabulary right, getting the spelling right, getting the punctuation right, rather than getting across ideas. So, and if you look at your general course books and analyze what they're doing, and particularly if you look at the supplementary workbooks, you'll find that an enormous number of tasks are in fact aimed at accuracy, not at communicative fluency. And in a moment I'll ask you to tell me whether this is true of what you remember of your textbooks. Bottom line, certainly as regards to the course books I've come across recently, language course books still stress getting it right rather than communicating. And I think this is something which is, I hope, will change. I don't think it's going to stay the way. I think it has already started changing. We certainly see a difference between modern course books and those published 20 years ago, in that the modern course books are moving towards more communicative work. But I was, just a little anecdote, I was working recently with a group in London adapting some course books which they have, which were not very good, and they wanted to make them better. And I was looking at the writing, specifically the writing exercises, the writing tasks. And there were almost no writing tasks whose main task was communicate this and this idea, or write a letter to say, or this. They were all things like, here is the way, this is how you should construct a paragraph, write your own paragraph observing the guidelines, this sort of thing. And I looked, another illustration, I looked at a recently published Israeli textbook where the writing sections were significantly headed with the title, Write It Right, which shows very clearly in which direction the author was thinking. I think there will be a move towards more communicative stuff. I hope there will be, and I think this is the way it's going. My fourth topic is culture and intercultural competence, the cultural content of course books, textbooks. There has been in recent years a great emphasis on cultural messages coming across from the materials. A lot of effort put in, much more than used to be, on avoidance of any kind of bias, whether it's ethnic or gender or age or whatever, or stereotyping, encouragement of awareness of and respect for the other, how you define the other. Something called intercultural competence, which is sometimes being taught in teacher courses. And publishers' directives. I published, Natasha mentioned a book I published in 1981 called Discussions That Work, the Green Book. And I put all sorts of things in there, which when I came to do a new edition, which I did a couple of years ago, something now called Discussions That Work. If you look at the Cambridge Standards, the one with the zebras on it, the zebra book, there were all sorts of things there which I was told, no, you've got to take this out. It's thoroughly unacceptable. There was some gender stereotyping and some implicit condemnation of extramarital or mention of extramarital relations and all sorts of things like that you can't put in books today because they might offend someone. So things have changed. Publishers' directives are very, very strict as regards gender and age and balanced ethnic representation, avoidance of anything possibly unacceptable to any specific community. But the question is it working? Are we managing to produce books which are not offending anybody? And if we are they becoming so bland that they're not interesting either, which is another problem? I recently ran a course on materials with a group of master's students in Israel. And I asked them to check their own course books along the following lines. I asked them, in grammar and vocabulary exercises, check the number of masculine pronouns as opposed to feminine pronouns. How many he's and hims and hises, rather, as compared to she and her. Okay? And then I asked them to look at the pictures. And remember, these are meant for teenagers. These books are meant for teenagers. Take out all the pictures that are obviously teenagers and count the number of adult pictures that are clearly people below 40 as opposed to the number of adult pictures which are clearly people above 40, and see if you can draw any conclusions as regards the attitude to age. And in both cases, they detected a clear bias. In the analysis of vocabulary and grammar exercises, they found many more masculine pronouns than they did feminine, which is very natural, actually. If someone says to me, give me an example, please, of a negative sentence in the third person present simple, I automatically start he. And I think a lot of us do, and I'm a woman. I mean, I shouldn't really, but it tends to happen. It's a sort of inbuilt atavistic tendency which we need to do something active if we're going to avoid it. As regards the age one, the people in the group came back to me and said, yes, but younger people are more attractive. We want people to be attracted to the book. If you have a lot of ugly old people in there, they won't be attracted. And I was a bit offended by this because I'm pretty old myself. But the question is, it's a very real question. It's a question of marketing versus education. You want to educate people to see and respect older people as respectable members of the community, or you want to sell your book by showing lots of beautiful, young, sexy men and women, which will draw their eyes and attract them. So it's a publishing problem, and I just leave. I'm not going to make any value judgments here, but it is an issue which they brought up, which needs to be discussed. So are the publishers' directives working? Maybe not. You check your own textbooks and tell me if Greek textbooks are unbiased, unstereotyped, and if so, how far. There is a need for sensitivity and awareness on the part of the teacher. If the teacher does detect any kind of bias, then it's really up to the teacher to do something about it, by commenting, by discussing, by changing, by whatever. Bottom line. Aspects of cultural awareness and intercultural competence are increasingly integrated into materials. I would claim not yet enough. and the trend is likely to continue with perhaps more careful control and regulation. Vocabulary. Vocabulary is words, lexis, words, but also multi-word items known as chunks, what I call chunks, like those. Items which are composed of more than one word, but actually indicate or represent one concept, and very often, incidentally, are translated into other languages by single words. So, of course, for example, the word of course in Hebrew is one word. In Greek, is it one word? One or two? One. Okay, so that's a good example. Now, the research says that successful reading and listening comprehension depends mainly on vocabulary, not grammar. You cannot understand a text unless you know, and this statistic keeps moving, but it's somewhere between 90 and 100% of the words. Students do not learn much vocabulary from extensive reading. You can't pick it up incidentally. It needs to be deliberately taught in order to reach target-like levels. And finally, and perhaps surprisingly, but very well attested by research, you cannot usually guess an unknown word from context. This research which I'm quoting here, what that showed was that when students were presented with unknown words in a text and asked to guess them, they guessed them wrong in more than 50% of the cases. And of the other cases that remained, some of them were precise, and a lot of them were partially right, partially wrong. I've done experiments with native-speaking English teachers and given them missing words in a text of English and asked them to guess what the missing word is, and very often they guess wrong. It's not that the students don't know English, and the problem is they don't know English. The problem is that usually an unknown word in a text is unguessable from the surrounding words. Occasionally it is, when the text is what's called pregnant, okay, nothing to do with having babies, it's when the text completely gives away what the unknown word is, and it's absolutely mega clear, then of course you can guess it. But this is the minority of cases. In most cases, the context is not unambiguous. It is not clear, and it's very, very difficult to guess. And to tell students, oh well, if you don't know a word, you can guess it normally, is misleading and not fair. What we need to do is actually teach the words they don't know, not tell them to guess them. The implications for materials are that there should be much more space allotted to vocabulary and teaching and review. For example, there should be much more work on vocabulary than there is on grammar. This is beginning to happen, but still, in most books I see, grammar is probably the still main language focus more than vocabulary. Is this true of your books, do you think? General assenting murmur, occasional thing. We'll talk about it in a moment. Both. My own bottom line here would be a greatest focus on vocabulary is a change that is hopefully here to stay. I think it's right, it's true, it's positive, it will lead to better learning, and that materials in other languages are likely to move in the same direction. I think in most course books today there is not yet enough focus on vocabulary, but as I say, it's moving, it's going to continue to change in that direction. My final topic, I think it's my final topic if I remember rightly, is the use of L1. Until comparatively recently, the message was, no, you shouldn't be using Greek, right? You should just be using English. It's begun to move. It's begun to change. It used to be English through English, no L1 or very little in most materials. Even it used to be that the instructions, even in elementary textbooks, were written in English, and there's no way the kids could possibly read and understand themselves. That's moving now. But in fact, even when it was a no-no, it wasn't a no-no as far as the teachers were concerned. A lot of teachers were still using a lot of mother tongue in the classroom, even if they weren't supposed to, because there's just no alternative in many cases. If the students aren't understanding what you're saying in English, what's the point in saying it in English? Which reminds me of another little story. I was in Turkey at a conference about a year ago, and I was talking about use of mother tongue and young learners, I think, and one of the members of the audience put up their hand and said, I went into a kindergarten recently where the kindergarten teacher, it was advertised as an English-speaking kindergarten, and the kindergarten teacher was speaking only English all the time. And I thought this was very impressive, and I asked one of the kids in Turkish, do you understand what the teacher is saying? And the kid said, no. And another kid piped up, of course she doesn't understand, it's English. In other words, English by definition is something you don't understand. And this seems to me a pretty negative message to be putting across to any kids, let alone kindergarten kids. English is great if you understand it, and the point of using English in the classroom is that it should be comprehensible. And if it's not comprehensible, we are justified in using Greek or whatever the mother tongue is to help students cope. What was happening, of course, when teachers were using L1 while being told not to, was that they were feeling uneasy about it, sometimes even guilty. There's evidence from research that mother tongue does have a positive role to play. First of all, there's interesting research by Jiang, 2002, where he found that people, when learning, he was talking about Chinese speakers, learning new words in English tended to label them with the mother tongue word, not with the real world reference. So if they were learning a word like chair, for example, they didn't link it immediately to that object over there. They linked it to the equivalent in Chinese and then to the object. So it seems, and it makes sense to me, that at the early stages we do mediate learning new words through our mother tongue, although as soon as we become proficient, we skip that. We go straight into, I mean, when you're speaking English now fluently to me or to each other or to anyone, you don't stop and think about the Greek equivalent for each word. You go straight into English. And sometimes it might even happen to you that a word comes to you in English and you can't immediately remember what the Greek was. So when people are fluent, they don't need the L1 crutch, but when they are beginning to learn new, strange words, the L1 can be really helpful. Has been found in research to be effective in vocabulary, teaching, learning. A very nice survey article in Language Teaching by Hall and Cook, 2012, also saying the same sort of thing. So probably, and notice my underlining here, materials should, not only may, but should, use the L1 where it is obviously conducive to learning, where it saves time, which can then be used for English. Okay, it actually creates situations where you can use English more. For example, explanations and instructions. A quick explanation in L1, so you have more time to do the activity itself, which is in English. Introducing vocabulary meanings, contrastive analysis. Sometimes this is why you're making this mistake, because in Greek we do it like this and in English we do it like this. That's why you're making the mistake. And this explanation will help you understand and help you avoid the error. Of course, most of the text and materials should still be and is in the target language. Bottom line. Sensible balance, okay, and the balance is one which will obviously change from situation to situation. And this is a change, I think, which is here to stay. I think the time when at least for younger, elementary and intermediate classes, the time when books were entirely in English is past, and that some use of L1 is needed in these types of books, though maybe not for the most advanced ones. Although having said that, I was giving last year a course in academic English to a very high level of academics who were learning English in order to publish their research in English. So they were pretty high level people. And even with them, I found that occasionally contrasting with their mother tongue really helped them understand things, particularly vocabulary. So I'm not sure about that. But certainly the main function is at the early stages with elementary learners. That's it, guys. Okay. Thank you very much. And I have left time for protests, comments, questions, anything you contribute to the discussion. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for listening. Yes. Anyone? Yes, go ahead. It should be working.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. From my analysis, it seems that most of the points you've made have kind of given the impression that course books are generally not a positive thing. Unless I've misunderstood, but you yourself say that you're in favour of course books.
If I gave the impression that I think course books are not a positive thing, I apologise, that wasn't my intention. I meant to say that they are a good thing, but that we do need to treat them as colleagues, not as masters, and adapt them and be aware of possible failings that they might have.
I always keep in mind something a professor once
Can
told
you
us.
speak louder?
Yeah, okay.
Is it not working?
Hello?
Yes.
I try to keep in mind something that once a professor told us, that a course book should be treated like a menu to choose from rather than a recipe to follow.
Yes, something to choose from rather than a recipe that you have to do everything. Yes. One of the principles I'll be talking about tomorrow is something I believe in very strongly, and the principle is mutilate the textbook. Do with it what you need to do with it to make your teaching good. You don't need to treat it like holy writ as if the author knew better than you did. Shout, Jamie.
It was very interesting about this idea of not being able to work out a word from its context. Hello, Penny.
Hi, Jamie.
It was very interesting, this idea of not being able to work out words from their context, and you mentioned that then this is a task for the classroom. Asking students to do that specific thing is maybe doesn't really have its place, but would you agree that there are times when that would be, as a means to an end, there would be a time and a place for that?
Yes, thanks for saying that, because that's absolutely true. You can't usually guess correctly for context, which means that it's not an efficient or effective way if your main aim is to teach a new word. Okay? If, however, your main aim is your main aim is reading comprehension, okay, then there is a place for guessing from context, because then, even if you don't guess it exactly right, if you guess the sort of thing it means, then that will help you with your reading. Or even if you decide, well, I'm not going to bother to guess this at all, I'm just going to skip it and read on. That's fine. So within reading comprehension, I think there is a place for guessing from context. Indeed, when the teacher is not available or a dictionary is not available, it is the only strategy left to us when we're reading on our own. So there is a place for guessing from context, and there is a place indeed for helping students, teaching them strategies to help them guess from context in the classroom. However, to return to my earlier point, if the point of the guessing is only to help students understand what the word means, then I'd just tell them what the word means and that's it. I wouldn't worry them with guessing. Is that distinction clear?
Yes.
Okay.
Should I say something else or not?
You can say something else.
No, no, just very, very quickly. I thought you might have, what you were going to maybe say was, as a means to actually teaching the word, just getting students to think about meaning first before you supplying it, giving them a sort of experience, making the teaching of the world a bit more, a bigger experience of it, a greater experience of it, is it?
What I've done, and I've done sessions which had spent more time on this particular point of guessing from context. I said that it's quite helpful to ask students for what sort of thing do you think this word means? You know, can you guess more or less the sort of thing? And then I say, yeah, you're pretty near. And then I give them the answer. But to encourage them sort of vague guessing without demanding from them to find the exact equivalent. So I think that's useful, yes.
George here.
Yes.
I'm really glad you made that distinction between reading comprehension and teaching vocabulary, because I was wondering, okay, if the students are just looking something that fits, or what the author is looking for. So in that case, it would be unguessable.
Yeah.
But for communicative purposes, if they find something that fits, then we go to what you said about reading comprehension.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
From the way that you speak about guessing, it seems to me that you think of it as a sort of deliberate act that is for teachers to ask the students to perform. But in my experiments about vocabulary learning, it seems to me that this is an act that is automatically triggered in the human brain. We automatically try to guess. The human brain, our brain, automatically tries to guess the meaning of a word that we do not know.
Yes.
So do you sort of see it as
I think the two are compatible. I think it's both. I think you're absolutely right that man is a meaning-making animal, and if I see something which I don't understand, I'm going to try to make meaning out of it, right? But also there are situations where the teacher or the textbook say, you know, what do you think this word means? And I was just trying to show that there are limitations to this, and I think it's a strategy which is somewhat overused by a lot of textbooks, and I'm not suggesting it shouldn't be used at all. I'm just suggesting that maybe we turn it down a bit and don't expect too much from our students on that.
Thank you.
Behind you.
Okay. Today we learned a lot from you about materials, but personally as a teacher, I didn't get just information, I got a new way of thinking. And I got this from your suggestion about digital materials. As teachers, we should ask not which is better, but which is better for what purpose. And I think this question applies in everything.
Yes.
We shouldn't ask what is good, what is bad, but what is good for what purpose. And anything that we, let's say, we blame and we may exclude from our teaching, for example, the use of native language, could be good if you use it for a specific purpose and could be effective. So we shouldn't reject things or be very strict on what we believe. There can always be something good from something which is considered bad.
Yes, I think that's an extremely valuable point, and you've put your finger exactly on what I was trying to say. I'd like to just expand what you've just said, because I think it's a key point. Luke, who said there is nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so. That could have been Shakespeare. There's nothing either good or bad in its own right in English teaching, except what is good or bad for learning. Our main point, our main aim as teachers is to teach in the sense of bringing about learning our students, getting our students to learn English. And if something brings about that goal, then that is good. And if something interferes with that goal, then it is bad, as a sort of general principle. And what has worried me throughout the years is the tendency in some contexts to see what should be a tool for increasing learner success, student learning, what should be a tool somehow transformed into a goal in its own end. I related to that when I was talking about digital materials, but it's happened with other things as well. For example, group work. Okay, group work is very good for some things. For example, getting students to talk to one another and other things. But it's not a good thing in itself. It's good if it produces good learning. It can be a very bad thing. It can produce complete chaos, and it's a means to an end. Why are you laughing? Has it happened to you? There's all sorts of examples like that, and I think what we need, if you know, my main message coming from my heart today and tomorrow is what we are looking for is how we can teach our students as best we possibly can, taking into account who they are, who we are, what the constraints of the exams or the situation or the parents or whatever the constraints are around us. How can we get them to learn as best we can, and we will use the tools that are appropriate to get them to learn, and those tools, it is our prerogative to choose. We choose them. Okay. And on that point, I think, we've got one more question. Yeah? Okay. It takes a moment to warm up, apparently. It should be up at the top. The switch should be at the top.
I can sound me.
Okay, hello. I don't think this works. No. I'd like to ask you some, give me a practical advice on something. I guess you know what you're doing. Now, you have a lower class, a B2 course book. You have the reading, reading strategies. Okay. And then you usually have one or two pages with vocabulary exercises. So you have all these new vocabulary items the students don't know. How do you get them to do the exercises? Okay, should I repeat?
How do you get them to do vocabulary exercises?
I mean, do you give them, if they don't know most of them, some students are weak, do you give them the definition so they can put them in gap-filling exercise, let's say? Do you ask them to look at the text, at the previous text, and guess the meaning from the context?
Natasha, how long do you have? That really needs a whole session on teaching vocabulary. Basically, at the beginning, to make it very oversimplified, really, I would make them a gift of the words. I would tell them what they mean in Greek and just tell them what they are, and then immediately go into exercises which demand from them to retrieve what I've just told them. In other words, I've told you what these words mean. Okay, here are all the words in Greek. Which ones do you remember now in English? Or let's go and do the exercises, gap fills or matching or whatever you've got, while the words are still reasonably fresh in their memory, so that they are likely to be able to succeed. What is very interesting research on vocabulary teaching, which says that it doesn't help so much just to re-expose them to the word, just to let them see it again or tell them again what it means. What really helps if you make them retrieve the word from memory, either see the picture or the Greek word or the definition and retrieve the original English word, or see the English word and do something to show that you've understood it, but take it from your memory rather than being spoon-fed again with the right answer. So Another thing coming out of the research is that you need, in order for a student to learn a new vocabulary item in another language, they need to review it something like between 10 and 16 times, much more than you'd imagine. So they do need this kind of review and this kind of retrieval-based review rather than just being exposed again to the word. I'll be talking a little bit about this tomorrow in some of the material. Yes. Also, Nation also says it, but various other people as well, Laufer and Amira, lots of experts on Schmidt, lots of experts on vocabulary teaching. Sorry? That's something different. That the mind can remember seven discrete items at the same time. That's something different. I'll talk about that later. But it's not about the number of times you need to encounter a new item. Yes?
Yeah? Okay, thanks. You also mentioned the use of L1 in the classroom. So I would like to ask you whether you think that the negative transfer theory, if it could probably help younger learners, or if it makes things even more difficult for them.
I think it makes it easier for them. I think at the beginning, yes, they see the new English words as equivalent to Greek, but as they move on, as they use the English words more and more, I think, as I said before, they lean less and less on the crutch of the Greek, and they move into doing it only through English. So I wouldn't worry. I don't think they get addicted to translation by using translation. I think their translation is a useful preliminary stage to using the new words or grammar in the English context and getting them used to using it like that.
Thank you very much, Penny.
Okay, thank you.